My name is Jackie. I have been working in a small roadside cafe for several years. The place was always quiet, except when the truckers stopped. These people always brought with them interesting stories and an atmosphere of adventure. One day, late at night, a man came to the cafe. His tall stature and muscular build were immediately noticeable. He had gray hair and a cold look that pierced through. He sat down at a table by the window and ordered a coffee. I walked up to him to take my order, and he looked up at me. His gaze was such that I felt coldness on my skin. He called himself Tom, but something about him made me dislike him. I served him coffee and hastened to leave. The night was quiet until Tom left the cafe. He paid for the coffee, leaving a generous tip, and headed out into the night. I watched him walk to his truck and felt something wrong cloud my mind. The next day, I heard news that made me shudder. The body of a young girl was found in a nearby town. She had been brutally murdered, and the police still had no suspects. My heart pounded as I remembered that strange trucker, Tom. Something in his behavior then seemed strange to me. I couldn't get rid of his thoughts. When I told my colleague Mike about it, he just laughed. "Jackie, you're always so suspicious. Maybe he was just tired," he said. But I knew that my feelings were not letting me down. A few days later, Tom appeared again in our cafe. This time, he looked even more gloomy. I tried to remain calm, but the feeling of anxiety did not leave me. He ordered coffee again, but this time we started talking. He said that he travels all over the country, transporting goods. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Did you hear about the body that was found nearby?" he asked me suddenly. I shuddered. "Yes, it's scary," I replied, trying to hide my concern. "The world is dangerous," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, I decided to stay in the cafe longer to follow Tom. When he left, I imperceptibly followed him. He got into his truck and drove off. I took my car and followed him, trying to keep a safe distance. We had been driving for about an hour when he stopped at an abandoned warehouse. My heart was pounding so hard I could hardly breathe. I stopped and hid behind the bushes, watching him. Tom got out of the truck and disappeared into the darkness. I decided to wait for his return. An hour later, Tom returned to his truck carrying a large black sack. He threw it in the trunk and drove away. A terrible foreboding came over me. I approached the place where he was and saw dark spots on the ground. My heart sank with fear. Something told me that Tom was involved in these terrible crimes. I decided to contact the police. The next day, I went to the local branch and told them everything I had seen. They promised to investigate, but I wasn't sure if they would take me seriously. But I knew one thing. I had to find out the truth. The police began an investigation but did not find enough evidence to charge Tom. He kept coming to the cafe, and every time I felt the cold seeping into my bones. One day he came up to me and said, "Do you know that curiosity can sometimes be dangerous?" I didn't know how to answer that, but his words kept me awake. Every night I heard his voice in my head, and the feeling of fear only increased. It's been a few weeks, and I'm already starting to think that maybe I'm exaggerating. But one night, when I was alone in the cafe, I heard a noise from outside. I came out and saw Tom standing by his truck. He was looking straight at me, and in his eyes I saw something dark, almost inhuman. "Jackie, come here," he said softly. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed with fear. He took a step towards me, and I felt my blood freeze in my veins. I knew I should run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Suddenly, I heard the sound of sirens. The police arrived. Tom took a sharp step back and jumped into his truck. I watched him flee into the night, with police cars chasing him. I felt a sense of relief, but also fear. What if they didn't arrive in time? The police detained Tom but found nothing suspicious in his truck. He denied all charges and was released a few days later. I knew he would come back, and it was only a matter of time. A few days passed, and I felt that Tom was watching me. I saw his truck near my house on my way home from work. Fear gripped me, and I didn't know what to do. I contacted the police again, but they couldn't do anything without evidence. I decided to talk to a private detective who was recommended to me by a friend. He promised to help me gather evidence against Tom. We began to follow him and soon discovered something terrible. One evening, we noticed Tom stopping by the abandoned warehouse again. We got closer and saw him pulling another black bag out of the truck. The detective took a picture of it, and we decided to wait for him to leave. After Tom left, we walked up to the warehouse and went inside. There we found many black bags, and each of them contained human remains. It was awful. We immediately called the police, and they came and arrested Tom. But this story was just beginning. Tom was behind bars again, but this time with more serious charges. However, I had no sense of relief. I still felt his presence like a shadow haunting me. The police began to investigate other disappearances in the area, and every day new gruesome details were discovered. One night, when I was alone at home, I heard strange noises outside the window. I came closer and saw a dark silhouette hiding in the bushes. My heart froze. Has Tom found a way to break out of prison? I called the police, but when they arrived, they found no one. They said that maybe I imagined it, but I knew it wasn't a dream. Every night I started hearing footsteps outside the window, and it drove me crazy. One day I decided to go to a cafe to find some peace. But when I got there, I saw that the door was open. It was dark inside, and I felt the cold running through my skin. I entered and heard something rustle in the corner. My breathing quickened, and I realized that I had to get out of here as soon as possible. As I turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a loud bang. I was trapped. In the darkness, I felt someone approaching me. My legs seemed to be attached to the floor, and I could not move. Suddenly, I saw the light of a lantern shining directly into my eyes. "Did you think you would run away from me?" came Tom's voice. He looked even more cruel and angry than before. My heart was beating so fast I thought it was going to jump out of my chest. He took a step towards me, and I felt his cold breath on my skin. Tom was holding a knife in his hands, and his eyes were shining with pleasure. "You can't run away now," he said. I knew I had to act quickly. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find and threw it at him. He took a step back, and I used that moment to run out of the cafe. I ran as fast as I could. My breathing was getting heavier, but I didn't stop. I knew that if he caught me, it would end very badly. I ran to the police station and told them everything. They immediately went to the cafe, but again they did not find Tom. The police decided to protect me and put me in a safe place. But even there, I did not feel safe. I knew Tom was somewhere nearby, and he wouldn't stop until he found me. Every night I heard footsteps outside the door and felt his gaze. One day, when I woke up at night, I saw that the door of my room was open. There was a note on the floor. "I will find you." My heart stopped. Tom knew where I was, and he was playing a survival game with me. I called the police, but they couldn't find any trace of Tom. They decided to transfer me to another place, but I felt that it would not help. Tom was too smart and cunning. He knew how to remain unnoticed. One day, when I was in the kitchen, I heard a soft whisper behind me. "I'm near," said the voice. I turned sharply, but did not see anyone. It was driving me crazy. I could no longer trust my eyes and ears. The police began to suspect that I was making all this up due to stress. They said I should rest and not think about Tom. But how could I forget about him when he was constantly chasing me? I knew I had to fight for my life. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started gathering information about Tom and his past. I found old news about people disappearing in the areas where he worked. It turned out that he had been leaving behind a bloody trail for a long time, but no one could catch him. I turned to the private detective again. He agreed to help me gather evidence against Tom. We started following his truck and again found him visiting abandoned warehouses and houses. This time we decided to be more careful. One day, when Tom stopped by an old warehouse, we got closer and started filming everything. We saw him pull another black bag out of the truck. We called the police and gave them all the evidence. This time they were more serious. The police arrested Tom again, and this time they had more evidence. They found more bodies in his truck and at places he frequented. I felt relief, but also fear. Tom was behind bars, but I knew his influence was still there. I started getting strange calls at night. Someone was breathing into the receiver and was silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that Tom had accomplices. I decided to leave the city and move to another state, hoping to start a new life. In a new city, I found a job and began to live more calmly. But even there, I was haunted by nightmares. I often woke up at night from terrible dreams in which Tom stood on the doorstep of my house. Once I received a letter without a return address. There was only one word in it: "I will find." I realized that even from a distance, Tom continued to pursue me. I didn't know what to do. The police said it might just be a joke, but I knew it wasn't. I decided to meet with the private investigator again and discuss my next steps. The detective advised me to change my name and appearance so that Tom could not find me. I agreed and went to another city under a new name. I changed my hair color and started wearing glasses. My new identity helped me feel more secure. But the fear still did not disappear. One day, when I was returning from work, I saw a familiar truck on a nearby street. My heart froze. Has Tom found me again? I quickly returned home and locked the door. All evening, I could not find peace. The next day, I decided to go to the local police and tell them about my suspicions. They said they would monitor the situation and check the area for suspicious persons. I felt a little calmer, but I couldn't relax completely. One evening, when I was returning home, I saw that the door of my apartment was open. I carefully went inside and saw that everything was overturned. My things were lying on the floor, and on the wall there was an inscription in red paint. "I will find you." I panicked. I quickly ran out of the apartment and called the police. When they arrived, they examined the crime scene but found no clues that could point to whoever did it. I knew it was Tom, but he was behind bars. Who was chasing me then? The police advised me to change my place of residence again. I agreed and moved again, this time to a more remote town. I found a new job and tried to live a normal life, but constant fear did not allow me to forget about the past. One day when I was walking home, I noticed a white van following me. My hands shook and I quickened my pace. The van also sped up. I started to run, but he kept up. I turned the corner and found an entrance where I could hide. I was sitting there trying to catch my breath when I heard the front door open. My fear grew. I leaned against the wall, trying not to make a sound. Someone carefully walked by, and I felt his presence like a cold breath on the back of my neck. Knew I had to act. Gathering all my courage, I jumped out of my shelter and ran back to the street. The van was there again, but this time I didn't stop. I ran as fast as I could until I reached the nearest crowded place. I felt a little safer, but the fear didn't go away. I called my detective and told him about the van. He advised me to buy a surveillance camera and install it near my house. I did so, hoping it would help catch the stalker. The next few days passed quietly, but I did not lose my vigilance. One evening, while checking the camera footage, I saw the same white van parked outside my house. A man in a hood came out of it and began to inspect the area. My hands trembled when I saw that he had taken out a crowbar. I quickly called the police and they immediately went to my place. When they arrived, the van was gone. They searched the area but again found nothing. I showed them the camera footage and they promised to increase patrols in the area. My life turned into a constant nightmare. I was afraid to leave the house and be alone. Once I received a letter without a return address. It had a photo of my house with the words, "You won't hide." I realized that the stalker knew where I lived, and it wasn't Tom. The police advised me to change my name and move again. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. This time I went to a small town in another state, hoping I wouldn't be found there. I changed not only my name, but also my appearance, trying to disappear from the radar. In a new place, I found a job in a small cafe. Life seemed calmer, but fear did not leave me. One evening, when I was working late, I noticed the same white van parked outside the cafe. My heart froze. Has the stalker found me again? I tried not to show my fear and continued to work. But when I went outside, the van followed me. I quickly returned to the cafe and closed the door. My breathing was fast and I couldn't concentrate. I knew he was somewhere nearby. I decided to leave work early and return home by a different route. I walked through the dark streets, constantly looking around. My heart was beating so fast I could hardly breathe. I finally reached my house and quickly closed the door. I turned on all the locks and checked the cameras. The van appeared on the screen. He stopped near my house and the same hooded man got out. I saw him come closer and start knocking on the door. My body froze with fear. I called the police, but they said they needed more time to come. I knew I couldn't wait. Opening the bedroom window, I climbed onto the fire escape and began to descend. The man continued to knock on the door, ignoring me. I quickly got down on the ground and ran to the neighboring house. She knocked on the door and begged for help. An old woman opened the door and immediately let me in. I explained the situation and she let me stay until the police arrived. The police finally came and searched my house, but the stalker had already disappeared. They reviewed the footage from the cameras, but were unable to identify the man. I felt even more defenseless. I knew he would come back. I lived in fear for the next few days. I couldn't sleep, eat, or work. Every sound, every whisper reminded me of a stalker. One day I received another letter. It had a picture of me leaving the cafe. On the back was written, "I'm always there." I could no longer bear this horror. I turned to a private detective to find the stalker. He agreed to help and began an investigation. We installed more cameras and started following my every move. One evening, on my way home, I noticed a van parked on the side of the road. The detective advised me not to approach and wait for him. I hid behind the bushes and watched. The van was standing still, but I knew there was someone inside. The detective finally arrived and began to cautiously approach the van. He saw that the driver's seat was empty, but when he opened the back door, there was no one inside. Only empty cans and junk. It was a trap, and we fell into it. When I returned home, I saw that the door of my apartment was open again. I knew the stalker was already inside. I carefully entered, holding a kitchen knife in my hands. It was quiet inside, but I felt like I was being watched. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper behind me. "I'm here," said the voice. I turned sharply, but did not see anyone. My heart was pounding so hard I could hardly breathe. I knew I had to run, but I couldn't move. Suddenly, a man's figure came out of the darkness. He was tall, with a rough face and eyes that glowed with hatred. "Did you think you could escape?" He slowly approached me, and I felt fear paralyzing me. I knew I had to act. Gathering all my courage, I stabbed him. He groaned and stepped back, but didn't fall. He got angry and started chasing me. I rushed to the exit, trying to escape. I saw the police on the street. They quickly arrested him and handcuffed him. I felt a huge relief when he couldn't chase me anymore, but the horror remained in my heart forever. I knew I could never completely shake off the fear he had left in my life. The pursuer was apprehended, but I felt that this was only the beginning. At night, when I was trying to sleep, I started hearing strange noises from the corridor. The soft creaking of the door and faint whispers made me feel the terror again. I knew that this could only be the result of my fear, but my heart was constricted with anxiety. One morning, I woke up to find a new letter on my bed. It read, "You can't avoid it." The letter was similar to the ones I had received before, but this new threat was even more terrifying. I contacted the detective, but he was too busy with other things. I felt that I couldn't do it myself. I decided to check all the locks and windows, change them to new ones, but it did not help to calm down. My fears turned into true paranoia. Every night I heard strange noises as if someone was walking around my house. My nerves were on edge. One day I decided to check what was happening. I carefully went through all the rooms but did not find anything suspicious. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the fear never left me. The following week, while I was relaxing in the park, I saw a man who looked a lot like my stalker. He was standing under a tree and was staring at me. I couldn't help but notice that terrible look. I decided to leave quickly, but I could feel his gaze following me. When I got home, I noticed that the front door was open again. I quickly closed them and checked all the locks. I felt like someone was in my house again. My days became terrible. I could not sleep, eat, or work properly. I began to feel that the stalker would never leave me alone. My fear became my constant companion. I started checking the surveillance footage more often, but I didn't notice anything suspicious. One evening, when I was going through the records, I noticed that a strange man appeared at my door. He didn't go any further, but I felt my hands begin to shake. I knew this person could be dangerous, but I couldn't figure out who it was. I decided to learn more about this man. I turned to a private detective to help me. The detective began an investigation and found out that the man works for a construction company and has no criminal record. However, I knew that the stalker could be more cunning than I thought. I continued to receive strange emails and see unpleasant signs on surveillance cameras. Every day the fear and anxiety grew. Once I received a letter with a photo of my old documents. On the back was written, "You can't hide from me." I realized that this man could be a part of something much bigger and scarier. My nerves were on edge. I tried to contact the police again, but they said there was not enough evidence to investigate further. I felt that I was left alone with my fear. Every night I sat listening to every sound, and every breath of wind seemed dangerous to me. My nerves reached the limit. I began to hear voices in my head telling me that I would never be able to escape the stalker. I knew it could only be the result of my fear, but these voices were very real. I decided to see a psychologist, hoping to find relief. The psychologist confirmed that my fear and anxiety were serious and that I needed help to deal with them. He recommended that I go to therapy to help me find peace again. I agreed, but I knew it would be a long and difficult process. My therapy sessions helped me partially recover, but the fear remained. I continued to receive threats and feel that the stalker was always around. My nights were filled with terror, and every day seemed like a struggle for survival. I tried to leave the house only during the day when there were more people around, but even this did not give me complete peace. Every day I checked all the locks and cameras, and every sound made my heart beat faster. One day I decided to go to the local library, hoping to find peace and escape tension. I took the book and sat down at a lonely table in the corner. But suddenly I noticed that a man was sitting at the table who looked very similar to the stalker. He looked at me without looking away. I tried not to show my fear and quickly left the library. I ran home, and when I got there, I noticed that the front door was open again. I quickly closed them and checked all the locks. The feeling of being persecuted again was unbearable. My life has become a real nightmare. I could not sleep peacefully, and every sound, every movement seemed to me a threat. I continued to receive threats and see unpleasant signs on surveillance cameras. One day I noticed that a recorded video appeared at my door. It showed my house and me when I was at home. I felt that this was a new stage in the persecution. I knew that he became even more aggressive and dangerous. I contacted the police again and told them about the new threats. They promised to increase patrols, but I did not feel much relief. I decided to take additional security measures. I bought more cameras and installed them in all the rooms. My fears became even greater when I noticed that the van reappeared near my house. This time, it was parked much longer. I quickly called the police and they came, but the van was empty again. I spent every night in fear that something would happen. I knew that the stalker could be anywhere and that he could come back to me again. I could not find peace and felt that my life had turned into an endless horror. One day, when I received another letter, I saw that it was written in blood. "I will always be with you," the message said. The letter looked like it was written not just by an intruder, but by a maniac who found pleasure in my fears. I knew I couldn't be alone again. I contacted the police, but it seemed that their help was not enough. I felt that I was no longer just being persecuted, but really being hunted. I became extremely cautious and began to suspect everyone around me. My fear became so strong that I could not open the door without checking to see if someone was sitting near it. My thoughts began to constantly revolve around the possibility of being caught. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I picked up the phone and the voice on the other end just whispered softly, "I know where you live." I felt my legs buckle and I could barely breathe. I immediately called the police, but this time their response was slow. I couldn't sleep at night. I sat on the sofa listening to every sound from outside. My nerves were on edge. One day, when I was looking out the window, I noticed a shadow moving in the darkness. I could not understand whether it was a real threat or the result of my fears, but every movement, every shadow became reasons for panic. I decided that I needed to leave the house for a while. I went to visit friends for a few days, hoping that would give me some peace of mind and maybe give the police time to find something. After I got home, I was full of anxiety. I felt that my struggle was not over yet. My house looked as if someone had been in it. The doors and windows did not seem to be the same as before. I decided to spend the last night in the house, hoping to find at least some peace. That evening, I sat in the dark, watching the cameras and listening to the sounds. Suddenly, I heard a loud creak on the roof. My heart rate quickened, and I felt the fear wash over me again. When I went up to the roof, I saw a terrible picture. A dark figure with a knife in his hands, standing near the ventilation pipe. He didn't say a word. I knew this night could be the end of me. I rushed inside the house, tried to hide and called the police, but it was too late. I could only wait and hope that someone would come to my aid. That night was the end of my struggle. I felt that this could be the end of my life, but also the end of my fears. I knew that I would never be able to forget these horrors, but I hoped that I would finally find peace and safety. and safety.